Thank you all for joining and registering for today's Ocean Climate Conversations webinar. And a big welcome as well. And thank you for attending today's webinar on America the Beautiful, the public comment period, and next steps. This webinar is a collaborative webinar hosted by the Seattle Aquarium, Hispanic Access Foundation, Healthy Ocean Coalition, and Inland Ocean Coalition. This webinar is also being offered in closed captions in Spanish. Just hit the closed captioning button at the bottom of your Zoom screen to begin those captions. And bienvenidos y gracias por estar a este webinar sobre America the Beautiful. Los subtítulos en español están disponibles también. Great. Well, thanks again, everyone. My name is Lance Kittle. I am the Associate Director for the Inland Ocean Coalition. I am calling in from the ancestral lands of the Ute peoples here in Colorado. Today, I am joined by Sarah Winter-Whelan, Executive Director of the Healthy Ocean Coalition, Shanna Edberg, the Director of Conservation Programs with Hispanic Access Foundation. I'm also joined by Heather Yu, a Washington Sea Grant Keystone Fellow at the Seattle Aquarium, as well as Jenna Valente, Director of Advocacy and Community Relations. The behind-the-scenes team consists of Melissa Young from the Inland Ocean Coalition, Jen Felt from the Healthy Ocean Coalition, and Hamna Sharif with the National Ocean Protection Coalition. So before we jump into the super duper exciting topics of 30 by 30 and America the Beautiful, I want to recognize that we are holding this space to not only inform participants of the America the Beautiful initiative, but also to assist in answering questions and providing space for discussion around the initiative as well. Now, as I'm sure all of you know, but just in case you don't, America the Beautiful is an interagency initiative which aims to provide recommendations on how to advance an inclusive and collaborative conservation vision. President Biden has issued a call to action that we work together to conserve, connect, and restore 30% of not only our lands, but 30% of our waters by 2030 for the sake of our economy, our health, and our well-being. A recent interagency report outlines the key principles of America the Beautiful that will guide our conservation efforts, including, but not limited to, honoring tribal sovereignty and supporting the priorities of tribal nations, conserving America's lands and waters for the benefit of all people, supporting locally led and locally designed conservation efforts, and building on existing tools and strategies with an emphasis on flexibility and adaptive approaches. Now, as I'm sure all of us feel this energy to really make a difference in the world, right? And now is not the time for business as usual. Now is the time for action. The latest IPCC report released on August 9th warns us of the dire state of the climate crisis. We're already seeing widespread and rapid changes to the ocean, and those changes are both accelerating in pace and locked in for future generations. Now, conservation actions should focus on outcomes that protect biodiversity, address the climate crisis, and provide more equitable access to nature. Now, America the Beautiful seeks to address three distinct problems. Number one, loss of biodiversity. Number two, the climate crisis. And finally, number three, the inequitable access to nature. Now, science has shown that marine protected areas are effective tools for addressing each three of these challenges. And we're here today to discuss not only marine protected areas, but how you can allow your voice to be heard by these interagencies to really understand how to move forward equitably and together. The Biden administration should focus and support strong protections that deliver the most benefits for biodiversity and climate. Science shows that highly and fully protected MPAs, among other solutions, are more effective at protecting biodiversity and enhancing ecosystem resilience in the face of climate change. The administration should also evaluate and measure progress towards the distinct goals of nature protection and access to nature. The solutions of each of these challenges may look completely different and should be measured separately. In some cases, these measures can help progress on multiple goals, though not all. We are in a biodiversity crisis. For example, 95% of the Florida Reef Tract, the only living coral reef in the continental United States, has died. A third of all marine mammals are currently threatened with extinction. And these are some of the unfortunate facts that we are here today to address, to empower you to speak up on, and to hopefully and aimfully move forward together. And again, thank you all sincerely for joining the webinar today. I am going to now turn the floor to Sarah Winter-Whelan. Thank you for allowing me this space, Sarah. Take it away.
Awesome. Thanks, Lance, so much for that introduction. I'm going to spend a little bit of time. So Lance has given us a really great sort of overview of what we're going to talk about. I'm going to dive into some specifics about how we got to America the Beautiful, to give some sort of flesh out some context, and then talk about what's happening right now with this particular comment period, which we're here today to write some comments, write some postcards, and have our voices heard to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Make sure that my video is spotlighted, since my presentation is like on this side of my, am I spotlighted? All right, good. I'm not spotlighted for myself, which is always a good thing because no one wants to see their face too large. Okay, so I'm really excited to talk about how the America the Beautiful initiative came to be. So on January 27th, President Biden signed Executive Order 14008. It's a really large executive order that jump-started many of the administration's initiatives and oversight entities. And it's also where the Biden administration set out its whole of government approach to tackling the climate crisis. It created the White House Office of Domestic Climate Policy, the National Climate Task Force, and elevated environmental justice at the White House, ensuring that environmental and climate justice is a centerpiece of their climate response. It also creates our nation's first ever national conservation strategy policy in Section 216, what we know as America the Beautiful. So in this executive order, President Biden commits to achieving the goal of conserving at least 30% of our lands and waters by 2030. He charges the Secretary of Interior specifically to work with the Secretaries of Agriculture, Commerce, and the chair of the White House Council on Environmental Quality to submit a report to the task force that recommends steps to achieve this goal of conserving 30% of our lands, waters, and ocean by 2030, and identify strategies that will result in broad participation from around the country. So notably, the president's challenge specifically emphasizes the notion of conservation of our nation's natural resources, rather than the related but different concept of protection or preservation. The administration did this specifically in the recognition that many uses of our national lands can be consistent with the long-term health and sustainability of natural systems. So it immediately sort of takes a broader, more inclusive perspective as to what might count toward this goal. So the agencies went out, per the executive order's charge, consulted with tribal leaders, engaged with landowners, local and state officials, other stakeholders like us, and on May 6th, released this preliminary report to the National Climate Task Force entitled Conserving and Restoring America the Beautiful. or as I like to call it, the crab report, but we'll go with America the Beautiful. So what's in this report? It's the recommendation, as asked for by President Biden, to the National Climate Task Force to launch a 10-year locally led, nationally scaled campaign to conserve and restore the lands and waters upon which we all depend. But why is a 10-year national conservation goal necessary? Well, the report, like Lance gave us some insight into, states that it's necessary to combat 3 key threats: loss of nature, climate change, and the inequitable access to the outdoors. The report details how these pose grave threats to the abundance, the resiliency, and accessibility of the natural resources that are the foundation of our well-being and economy. So this report basically launches this 10-year national conservation strategy. But what does it actually mean? And what are the core principles? Well, Lance detailed a couple of them, and I just want to throw them up here on this slide for everyone to look at. These 8 core principles in the report are identified by the Secretaries of Agriculture, Interior, and Commerce as the essential ingredients to building and maintaining broad support, enthusiasm, and trust for America the Beautiful. These principles are considered indispensable to being able to achieve durable outcomes that will meaningfully improve the lives of Americans. So we've provided them here. They're also in the resource folder that we sent a link to, and you can check out the list and read a synopsis of what each entails. Make sure everyone had a chance to look at them. The report also lays out how the federal government will develop a baseline. So what exists? What have we already conserved or restored? And how do we develop metrics for what should count towards conserving at least 30% of our lands, ocean, and waters by 2030? One core piece outlined in the report is the development of the American Conservation and Stewardship Atlas. And I'm just going to call it the Atlas because that's a lot of words. The Atlas is going to be baseline information for how much land and water are currently conserved. And the tool is meant to help track progress. So where do we sit now? How much has the government, how much have private landowners conserved? And what is it going to take to get to 30%, at least 30% by 2030 in this 10-year national goal? So it's a pretty important piece, and it's definitely a place where we can raise our voices for the metrics of what we think should count towards this goal. There's an interagency working group, which the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration is co-chair of, wink, wink. And they're going to consider voluntary conservation measures. They're going to consider measures that have been taken under existing authorities, and what next? How do we count up to 30% and beyond? All right. So there's also an understanding that this is a pretty big initiative, and the government can't tackle everything at once. And so in the report, it identifies 6 areas of focus. And not surprisingly, it focuses on some really important things to start out on: creating more parks and safe outdoor opportunities in nature-deprived communities, supporting tribally led conservation and restoration priorities, expanding collaborative conservation of fish and wildlife habitat and corridors, increasing access for outdoor recreation, incentivizing voluntary conservation, and creating jobs. So now is the hard part. What does this actually look like on land and in the water? So we're here this afternoon to talk about the opportunity we have right now through one of the federal agencies that will work to implement America the Beautiful, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which I'm going to start calling NOAA now, or I'm eventually just going to butcher the name. So NOAA stepped out pretty early in the America the Beautiful process and has held a set of listening sessions over the summer and fall, and has now opened a 60-day comment period. It closes on December 28th. And NOAA is requesting information from us on how it should exercise its authorities. If you work in the ocean space already, these authorities that I'm going to mention are going to sound familiar to you. So think the National Marine Sanctuaries Act, the Magnuson-Stevens Act. the Endangered Species Act, the Marine Mammal Protection Act, and the Coastal Zone Management Act. So those are just some of the things that are going to be impacted that NOAA is going to use in its role to help guide and implement the America the Beautiful initiative. So NOAA wants to hear from us. I know this violates every rule of putting too many words on a slide, and I'm not going to read them, but I did want to just note that NOAA has a set of questions that it is asking of us. But what these questions really boil down to is that NOAA wants to know and invites us to help guide them in how they should use their responsibilities that they already have to help conserve and restore ocean, coastal, and Great Lakes resources under their management. How should NOAA engage in the development of that atlas that I mentioned? How should NOAA track its progress towards advancing the goals and recommendations in the reports? So there's a lot that we can comment to NOAA on. And I think that many of us probably have some ideas. So what are our goals today? So one, we want to talk about what are the components of a successful America the Beautiful initiative, which I'm going to lead to Shauna and Heather to talk about. And then how can we help you write what you want NOAA to know? What do you think are the key components to a successful America the Beautiful initiative? And what should NOAA specifically be doing? So in closing, I want to ask us that we remember a few things, two things. One, this is a really big initiative, and today's workshop is just focused on NOAA's role. And then the second is that this is the first bite of that really big apple. And some of you had awesome questions when you registered about what this might look like at the local level. And the answer is, we don't know yet. It's kind of up to us to envision and then advocate for it. And it's going to look different across the country. Some states have 30 by 30 legislation pending or passed. Some have executive orders on 30 by 30, and some don't even know what 30 by 30 or the America the Beautiful initiative is. So I hope this has been helpful. And Lance, I'm going to hand it back to you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And I can't wait for all of us on the panel to address some of those questions in just a bit. But for now, I would love to pass it over to Shauna Edberg, the Director of Conservation Programs at Hispanic Access Foundation. Shauna, the floor is yours.
All right, everyone looking at my slides? Cool. So I am here to talk about why our organization cares about America the Beautiful and what we want to see come out of it. If you're not familiar with who we are, Hispanic Access Foundation is a national nonprofit with a mission to connect Latinos to partners and opportunities to improve lives and create an equitable society. We work in several different areas in the field of conservation, including land and nature, ocean and coast, waterways and watersheds, and the climate crisis. And some of the things that we do in those areas are creating different research resources, toolkits, all things for the community and for advocates to use. We engage the community by creating films, hosting film festivals, doing community roundtables, and all sorts of fun events. We build networks like our amazing Ocean Advisory Council, our Por la Creación faith-based network, and I think a few of you here today are representing these networks. And we take action during times like Latino Conservation Week and year-round advocacy and meetings with decision makers. And we love 30 by 30 because it ties into all of the issues that we work on, but with a really important caveat that it needs to be done equitably. So why do we care about 30 by 30 and why does it need to be equitable? Because there are racial disparities in access to nature. We have found through our research that people of color are 3 times more likely to be nature deprived than white people. So what that means is every 30 seconds, in the United States, a football field's worth of nature and natural land is paved over for urban development, for oil and gas, for highways, what have you. And where that is happening is in neighborhoods with people of color. And so what nature deprivation means for our communities when they lose this access to nature and, you know, their neighborhood becomes very, very concrete, is less climate resilience, because more concrete leads to more heat islands, more flooding, higher storm risk. It means less exercise that you can do, less recreation outdoors, because who wants to work out somewhere that's just like ugly and full of cars and air pollution racing by? More pollution, because greenery is a really important absorber of air pollution as well as greenhouse gases. So it contributes to worsening the climate crisis as well. Fewer economic opportunities, poor education quality when you don't have outdoor education for kids, and mental health is also a really important factor in this, as we all learned in the past couple of years, just being able to go outside and be present in nature has a hugely restorative and healing effect. And all of this adds up to worsening the current crises that we're all dealing with. So I mentioned the climate crisis, but also COVID-19, because Latinos and Black people right now are facing higher hospitalization and death rates from COVID-19. And part of that has to do with the air pollution and lowered immune systems from the destruction of nature and lack of access to nature. So here I'll just quickly show a map of what we call hotspots. And this is where high rates of nature destruction or lack of access to nature coincide with where communities of color live. So it's everywhere basically that you have high population centers. You also have nature being destroyed around communities of color. So I talked a bit about the land protection piece and why that aspect of 30 by 30 is important. When it comes to the ocean, that we also have a really important stake in ocean health, because an ocean that is not healthy also threatens communities and makes communities less healthy. And so one of those things is when sea level rise or floods, as I've mentioned, threatens folks' safety and their shelter. In fact, one of our Ocean Advisory Council members just texted me that he has to go and deal with some sea level rise in his bathroom right now in Miami. So hopefully that gets resolved quickly. Economic livelihoods that depend on the ocean, even things like construction, like naval or security forces, those are all ocean adjacent, and those are all threatened by a less healthy, more polluted, more acidic ocean. And of course, it also affects well-being just as much as access to green and nature spaces improve your health and well-being. The same is true for blue spaces. And it's even a matter of life or death for our children, because Latino and Black children are more likely to drown because they don't have access to safe, clean water to learn to swim. It's also a matter of preserving Latino, Indigenous, and other heritage of people of color. Because of climate crisis and sea level rise, we are literally losing our heritage in some places. It's literally ending up underwater. So these are just some like really cool sites of Latino heritage in every part of the US that I suggest you look up and maybe try and visit, because they are pretty cool. And in some cases are under threat. So I talked about the importance of access. And so I want to mention also the different factors that are involved in making this access equitable, because there's a whole lot more than just, you know, kind of having nature or a coastal space or a river nearby, right? So, and even that is not happening for so many of our communities. So you have to be able to get to these places, which also means you have to have disposable income, you have to have time, maybe you have to have childcare or transit, and communities of color are less able to, are more reliant on public transit, excuse me, have less access to cars than white communities do. Once you get there, if you can get there, there are even disparities in the quality of the experience, programming, language that may not be for you. The area might be polluted, as in the case of a lot of our communities in the areas that they have nearby. There may be hostile features. It might not be maintained well. It might not have the facilities that you need and might not cater to the different uses of nature that communities have. There's also disparities even in education and workforce because Latino and Black communities are disproportionately less represented in science, marine-based careers and in the conservation workforce as a whole. So that's something that we would think is an important aspect of access and something else that we would like to correct with America the Beautiful. And it might seem pretty obvious, but it's really hard to get affordable housing in somewhere that's near the coast or even near a green or blue space. So affordable housing is also a component of this, as well as folks who fish to live on it. Subsistence fishers are more likely to be Latino, and they're also less likely to be aware of pollution and fishery advisories. So that's another important part of access. And part of access is also being able to protect your access. So that's the heritage sites that I mentioned, sacred sites, having these sites available for climate resilience. And all that means that our communities need to be empowered to do this work of naming a place that's important to them and saying, we are going to protect it or restore it. So how do we make 30 by 30 equitable and achieve all of these, closing all these disparities that I mentioned? Well, there's a lot of things that we need to do. So what I and our organization will be writing in our comment letter to NOAA is that we need to work beyond just the field of conservation in order to achieve conservation. So like I said, things like housing, transit, workforce, economies, businesses, all of that is a factor in achieving 30 by 30. And so it needs to be a whole of government approach. We think every agency needs to be coordinating on this in a similar way that the Biden administration is coordinating across the whole government on climate change. We think that Justice 40 should also be applied in the 30 by 30 initiative. And so if you're not familiar with Justice 40, it is the Biden administration's commitment that 40% of benefits accrue to environmental justice communities. So communities that have been facing a disproportionate burden of pollution. And again, workforce hiring, we want to see more communities of color and historically excluded communities in the conservation workforce and in any hiring that happens because of 30 by 30. We want equity to be measured, because without measurement, without tracking, it's not going to happen. We think that the Biden administration should measure nature deprivation and the nature gap. It should measure environmental justice, and we should be showing progress on these indicators, as well as climate vulnerability, because like I said, vulnerability to different climate hazards is a big part of this. The processes that are done to achieve 30 by 30 also need to be inclusive and equitable. So it can't just be the outcomes, it also has to be the process, how we get there. And one way to do that can be through funding, helping underserved communities and tribal nations and other groups that don't traditionally have a seat at the table, giving them funding as well as access to be present and help make these decisions is really necessary. Otherwise, we will end up with a 30 by 30 that only benefits, whiter, more affluent communities, and that's not what we want to see. For more information on any of this, we have a short report called Equity, Environmental Justice in 30 by 30 that you can find on our website, hispanicaccess.org. And you are welcome to email me, And I'll also be happy to hear any questions. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Shauna, as always. Just a quick note, we will be holding space for questions at the end. So keep all of those juicy ones in your back pocket until we run through our esteemed speaker list for the day. And with that being said, I want to hand it over to Heather Yu, Washington Sea Grant Keystone Fellow at the Seattle Aquarium. Heather, please take it away.
Hi, everyone. Lance, thank you for that incredible introduction. And Shauna, that was amazing. And it's always great to hear from Shauna and the Hispanic Access Foundation and the incredibly important perspectives and expertise that they bring to the ocean conservation space. I also want to thank Sarah and Lance for the really helpful overview they gave of 30 by 30. So I'm going to talk from the position of the Seattle Aquarium and how we have been thinking about 30 by 30 and America the Beautiful. Let's see. So I realize that you guys probably see something. Sorry about this. So our mission at the Seattle Aquarium is to inspire conservation of our marine environment. And going off of that, we've developed sort of these pillars of our conservation priorities, which are climate resilience, sustainable seas, and clean waters. Together, these three pillars address some of the most urgent issues facing our ocean. And it's also interesting of like what the role that aquariums play and why you might think, why is 30 by 30 important to us? I mean, for so many reasons. So many zoos and aquariums are thought of as places to see animals and that provide animal care. And while that is true, that's just the tip of the iceberg. We are extremely active conservation organizations. So not only do we inspire conservation, for instance, here at the aquarium, we have over 800,000 visitors annually. So just think of that reach, but we're also conducting conservation on the ground. And we have so many programs directing at trying to increase access to the ocean and marine issues. And we partner with dozens of community-based organizations. And part of this partnering is also making sure that we provide free admissions. So for this year alone, we already did 29,000 distributions. We also do conservation education through things like our Beach Naturalist program, where we will actually send out staff to local beaches to educate passersby and just anyone on the beach about what our tidal systems are like and the incredible abundant life that's just in the sand. We also do in-classroom programming. And another thing that's been really growing in our institution is thinking about how we cultivate empathy for the ocean. So the ocean is this vast space, and at many times it can feel really alien. So how do you empathize with, I don't know, a gooey duck or a cuttlefish, which is very cute, but you have to learn how to think about the ocean on a deeper level in order to care enough, right, to conserve it. We also do community science, and this year alone, we've already accessed over 375 high school students, which you think about this from the intergenerational aspects about who's conducting marine science and giving them this opportunity to experience field work. But all of this just goes to say that aquariums and zoos really, we occupy a unique role, and like we're trusted brokers of information. And we also do a lot of policy and advocacy work, and we sit in that nexus between decision makers and the greater public, right? We have this amazing reach, even more so than other NGOs and nonprofits. And that's something that a lot of agencies don't have, right? But they need to hear from the public. So here at the Seattle Aquarium, these are some of our policy focus areas. We are extremely concerned about Irish Southern resident orcas. We also work on reducing plastic pollution, maintaining environmental protections, promoting sustainable fisheries and tourism, advancing environmental justice, and building climate resilience. 30 by 30 is kind of a newer bucket, but I think you can imagine all the ways that it has direct salience to these others. Even reducing plastic pollution, right? And this is an important thing about marine protected areas, which when we're talking about ocean conservation at 30 by 30, we're really talking about MPAs. So things like plastic pollution and ocean acidification and warming waters, MPAs aren't going to fix that, right? And so you might have naysayers say, then what is the use of an MPA? The thing is, MPAs are a conservation tool, and they're meant to help us fulfill conservation goals. And the truth is, that when you have intact ecosystems, aka ecosystems that are well protected, they are more able and more resilient towards these other impacts that are unabatable, such as ocean acidification and nutrient runoff and plastic pollution. So that's the case for MPAs, right? And why they're so important. And also, it's important to remember that 30 by 30 is not a random number. It might sound catchy, but it's a scientifically backed number, right? This is the necessary percentage we need to avoid catastrophic climate change and catastrophic ecosystem collapse. I pulled this image from NOAA, which Sarah introduced earlier, but it shows the MPA coverage in all of the United States, right? So the neon blue is just any like moderate to light protection is neon blue. The red indicates areas that are highly or fully protected. Highly or fully protected means that there's almost no extraction or harvesting or take of any marine resources allowed in those spaces. I think this visual is really useful, and I want you to hold it in your mind as we move on to the next slide, and I kind of go deeper into some 3 core areas that we consider important at the aquarium. And so it's about, we need to make sure that when we're thinking about 30 by 30, that we remember why we're doing this. And it's because we're in this pivotal moment, right? It's not about once in a lifetime opportunity. We're talking about the only opportunity for all lifetimes, right? We need to protect and conserve 30% by 2030. And that's only an interim goal. Actually, science has told us that we need 50% by 2050. So we need to think about this from a needs-based and extremely intentional approach. So the first need is prioritizing resilience. The truth is we have ecosystems that are still hanging in there and are persevering, right? Despite all of the challenges and impacts that they are experiencing. To give you an example, I've shown this image of seagrass sites. They're basically showing long-term trends in seagrasses in the greater Puget Sound region. So Puget Sound is here in Washington State. It's the 2nd largest estuary in the United States. And it's extremely important from a biodiversity perspective. It's also sort of the hub of Washington State in terms of our economy and where people live. You'll see that the green sites and the white ones show where there has been either no change in seagrass or there's been an increase actually. And the red is where there have been declines, right? Why am I talking about seagrass? Seagrass is one of those fundamental habitat forming species. It's critical to fish and orca, other marine mammals, sea turtles, so many different species rely on seagrasses. And thereby so many human communities too, whether it's our fisheries or just for our clean water. So while everyone's really excited about restoration and there's been a lot of buzz, what about the areas that are still resilient and need protection, right? We're leaving them vulnerable. So it's not about either or, but in terms of timing matters about when we do these things, we should prioritize resilient ecosystems, resilient spaces first. Next is our coastal waters. If you look back and think back to that slide that I show you about US MPA coverage right now, you'll notice that most of our coastal areas are bare, right? They're not protected. The vast majority of protections are in the far West Pacific, actually over 90% of those protections. That's a problem, because if we're thinking about whether it's climate resilience or biodiversity or protecting coastal communities and increasing access to nature, we're talking about coastal areas. And that's something that NOAA and all other government partners really need to be thinking about and focusing when we're trying to implement 30 by 30. Lastly, as Shauna so well brought up earlier about increasing nature equity and access to nature, right? Especially here in Washington, tribes play such a central role in managing our natural resources and as leaders in the environmental space. So for here at the Seattle Aquarium, it's about elevating and honoring tribal and indigenous cultural and traditional rights and uses and centering their priorities. It's also about preventing additional environmental harm. The additional is the core piece here. We need to look at this from a historical context, and it's about how our vulnerable communities disproportionately bear the impacts of climate change and environmental disaster, right? So when we protect ecosystems, and make sure they continue to function and deliver ecosystem services, it's about making that translates to how vulnerable communities experience day-to-day life. And so that's why it's about increasing access to nature's life-sustaining benefits. They're not tack on bonus, like great things about walking in the park. No, it's about clean air, clean water, and our entire economy. And so those are the three areas that I would like to highlight for all of you. And in terms of next steps, we have an audience letter at the Aquarium that's part of this public comment period to NOAA, and we invite you to sign on. You can also subscribe to receive our policy action alerts from Seattle Aquarium, and we are constantly year-long advocacy on these issues. And a final word is a reminder to all that this work is only going to be as meaningful as we collectively make it. So your voice really matters, and what you choose to stress. Thank you.
Heather, what an excellent presentation. I really appreciate not only your insight and your knowledge, but also the fact that you touched on the 30 behind 30 by 30. We may have this seemingly arbitrary number, but it's great to hear that 30% is not only scientifically backed, but feasible as well. As much as I would love to say, 100 by tomorrow is on the agenda, we have to take some first steps, right? Thank you, Heather. For our last panel speaker of the day, I would love to turn it over to Jenna Valente, the Director of Advocacy and Community Relations with the Healthy Ocean Coalition. Jenna, wrap us up.
All right, I'll do my best. Let me get my slides up. Little thumbs up, everybody can see that. I think they might be still loading. All right, awesome. And I also, thanks to other panelists, you guys are all amazing. You inspire me so much. And it's just like such an honor to work with all of you. And I think Heather really segued into my piece so well, because she ended her piece with talking about how important using our collective voice is. And that's exactly what I'm going to talk about. So again, I'm Jenna Valente. I'm the Director of Advocacy for the Healthy Ocean Coalition. And my goal over the next few minutes is to share some guidance, really pulled from my experience in advocating for ocean conservation, about how to effectively and efficiently write a comment letter so that we can roll into our smaller breakout groups with a bit of an idea of how we might want to structure our comments, or maybe if you're brand new to this, some things that you might want to practice. Okay, so some of you may be sitting there being like, why even write a comment letter? Are they actually effective? Do people even read them? And I just wanted to share just a personal anecdote from my experience in the job that I had before this one. I worked for a group, it's a research and science organization called the Chesapeake Bay Program in Annapolis, Maryland. And while I was working there, it was while they were drafting the most recent version of the Chesapeake Bay Watershed Agreement. And throughout that process, we received thousands of comments. And I can tell you, because I was one of the people that was doing it, we read every single one of them. We logged every single one of them, and we included the feedback that we received in what is now the Chesapeake Bay Watershed Agreement. And I think throughout that experience, it was a big takeaway from me, for me, was it was just really amazing to see how many people out there really care about the environment in the Chesapeake Bay and wanted to participate and have their voice heard. And I think it's really cool now that I get to sit on the other side of it where I'm an advocate. It makes me feel a little bit better having had that experience and knowing that, like, yes, there are people that are actually reading these comments and valuing your feedback. So of course, there are many reasons to write a comment letter, but just in my own experience, these three are like the most succinct summary that I could come up with. And the first one is just that there's power in numbers. And I know that this may sound really cliche, but it's true. When decision makers are reading through comments, they notice trends. And They are looking for things like resounding support or resounding disapproval, and incorporating those things in their decision-making process, or the policy of their plan that they're writing. So the larger number of individual comments that people receive, the better, the more likely they'll be taken into account. And then this next point really ties into the first one, is that writing a comment is a form of advocacy, and it really can directly inform and influence policy. And I think, you know, this one is the most important one to me. It's your perspectives and your voices are unique, because while new policies and plans and rules and actions impact a lot of people, yes, and impact a lot of constituents for whatever decision maker is making the rule, you have a unique lived experience, and that means that you might see a blind spot or something that the decision makers don't see about how what their action is or what they're trying to do will affect you or your community. It's possible that some of the policymakers, maybe they're not even considering it, maybe they're actively ignoring it, depending on where you live. And so sometimes writing a comment can be valuable just to get it on the public record, so that people know that these decision makers are aware of this issue or whatever you're submitting your comment about. So it's a great way for you to notice, you know, details that might be missing, and bring them up for people that are making the rules to be aware of. Okay, so this next piece is about formatting comment letters, and we'll get more into this in our smaller breakout groups. But just some tips that I find helpful in comment letter writing is first and foremost, including the full name and the address of the people or organization or person that you are directing your comment at, because after all, we want to make sure that the comment reaches the destination that we are hoping it to go to. And then also be sure to reference the policy or the rule that you are commenting on, in addition to introducing yourself and explaining a little bit about how you are a stakeholder in this process and how the proposed rule might impact or affect you, your organization, or your community. Additionally, if you're writing a more in-depth comment letter, using citation numbers or direct quotes, if you're referring to a specific piece of a policy, rule, or plan, is great, so that the person that's reading it can easily reference what you're talking about. And then you also can link to studies, white papers, additional resources that you think will make your ask stronger or help inform the policy. So feel free to add in like as much information as you want into your comment letter. And then make sure that somewhere in your comment letter, your ask is very clear. So just for an example, relating to the Conserving and Restoring America the Beautiful initiative, something that you could say could sound like this. So we're asking the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration to prioritize new, highly and fully marine protected areas, which are places set aside for the long-term conservation of nature, and enhance existing marine protected areas with stronger protections to achieve the goals of America the Beautiful. That was pulled directly from the resource folder that we provided you. So if fully and highly protected areas are something that you're interested in and want to write comments about, we have that comment in there with actually more information backing up why we might make that ask, with so much more. So then the last little piece here on this slide is adding a word of thanks can be a nice touch to your comment letter. I think, I kind of think of it through the Healthy Ocean Coalition, like when we write comment letters, it's like a thank you sandwich almost. Like we start off by thanking whoever we're writing to for the opportunity to provide comment, or specifically in the case of the Conserving and Restoring America the Beautiful initiative. We thank them for their commitment to implementing a decade-long locally led conservation plan. And then we get into the body of our comment letter. So introducing ourselves, making the connection to the issues, and making our ask. And then we wrap it up with another shorter thanks. So many of you could also be like, how long should a comment letter be? And I really wish that I had a more specific response for this one. It can be as short or as long as you feel it needs to be. So if there is one issue that you want to bring up and you can communicate it really clearly, your comment letter could be a few sentences to a paragraph long, all the way to if you're talking about multiple issues, multiple recommendations, maybe more of a scientific or technical letter, that could be a really long comment. So it really depends on what your goal is for the comment. I know some of you today have postcards in front of you and will be working on filling those out. So, I mean, that's where your comment might differ in length versus somebody that's working off the portal, is because by nature of a postcard, you really only have a limited amount of space. So the people filling out postcards, you might keep it to 1 or 2 asks, kind of keep it short and succinct, or write really, really, really small. But I think probably you'll just err on the side of keeping it short. And then if you're working off of the electronic comment portal that we have, you have a lot more wiggle room there with if you want to bring up a few different points. And then that one, so the postcards should have come with postage already. So the goal for the breakout groups will be, by the time we part ways today, either having a postcard ready to go put in the mail, or if you're working off the portal, all you have to do is hit send, and then your comment will go straight to the Federal Register and be logged as feedback for NOAA during this comment period. So the last thing that I'll cover before pausing to get into our Q&A is just asks. So at their core, asks are for like a clear comment letter. They usually just have a very specific area of concern that they highlight, and then a specific set of recommendations, which we call asks. And then just highlighting again that I know we've covered a lot of ground in not a lot of time. And we pulled together a really great suite of resources for all of you to reference during both our breakout groups, but then well beyond that. So you're welcome to share those with your communities. If you want more time to explore those, we're happy to follow up with you. And those are there for your use. You could literally take the things that are in there for sample asks and use those as your comment, or you can have fun with it and personalize it and just use them to inform your comment as well. So there are also, you'll see in that folder 2 sample letters that outline maybe what you could write on your postcard, certainly not being prescriptive if you have other thoughts in mind. But if you'd like some assistance, that's there for you. And then we also have the sample text that is in the portal online that you actually will be able to go in and live edit right there. And then if you feel comfortable and confident with what you develop, we can send that away to NOAA today. And I'll pause there. Stop sharing my screen.
Awesome. Thank you, Jenna. Let me just run through, get some spotlights on our panel here. Shanna and Heather. I believe I have everyone. Thank you again, Jenna, sincerely, for running us through kind of the logistics of, how to write a letter. I know it may seem a little silly at sometimes, but this is really, really beneficial information for all of us. Real quick, I figured we would just jump into a couple of questions that came in both prior and during our presentation today, in hopes that some of these answers will help guide you to a more sincere and succinct comment letter during this comment period. So this is going to be a general question that goes out to the entire panel, which will roll into a second question. But in your relative experience, panel, is there areas of this legislation that are lacking? Is there a specific area where maybe we could include a bit more of that personal story that Jenna brought up, or maybe look towards some of the maps that Heather showed us, for example? What's your take on the areas that may be lacking in 30 by 30 and America the Beautiful? Don't everyone unmute at once. I know it's a hot topic, but
I mean, I think, you know, what Shauna and Heather, I'm going to let them obviously answer this for themselves, but I'll say that, you know, in the overview that I gave, we're really at the very beginning. And so, you know, there is just a lot of room. It's not so much that there's something, I mean, I think we have ideas for what needs to be in it. And it's more about molding and shaping the effort to make sure it includes those things, as opposed to it missing something. I think there's just a lot of room to add and to make sure that the things we think that are important that we've talked about are there. But that's just super general.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think what we have seen from the administration is this very high level report and several requests for comments. So we just need to kind of hold them accountable and make sure that they are implementing this the way we want to see it implemented, and that we are actually making progress on these goals, because right now, frankly, we don't have much. It feels like it's just barely getting started.
I will second what Shauna and Sarah both said. And going back to the way you phrased the question, Lance, like what's missing from this legislation? It's kind of a trick question because multiple truths can be true at the same time. What the legislation lacks in direction and, you know, what we're exactly supposed to do, it makes up for in making sure that it's as expansive as possible. But there's always trade-offs, right? So now it's really, you know, when the administration wrote this report, they did it through a series of public engagements, right? They were trying to really be thoughtful about it. The end result was, okay, you guys have so many opinions, you care about so many things, we're going to let you guys lead. And so now we're like, oh, okay, so we're responsible for leading. So it does have to be community driven. And that's what I mean by it's only as meaningful as we collectively make it. So there's a lot of power in our hands, but it's diffused. So we just have to find ways to concentrate it.
Yeah, I think that everybody summarized that perfectly. I can only echo what they said. And, you know, my feelings on where we're at right now in this process is that they are very much in this like information gathering phase. Anytime that we have asked the administration to see more of a plan or hear about exactly what they're doing, we usually get the response, well, you tell us, you are the experts. We want to know what you have to say. And from, you know, Healthy Ocean Coalition perspective, we're a network of grassroots advocates from all over the country. So we're like, okay, if you're asking us for feedback, then here we go. We're gonna flood your inboxes with it, and then wait for the next step to see what they take, what sticks, and then probably come back to them with more feedback.
So really what I'm hearing here is that while the legislation may lack some things at the current moment, that by no means moves us to the point that it will never be in the legislation. And not only that, but maybe what's lacking is our input as individuals, right? And we as a collective are able to shape the direction and really add those pieces that we feel are lacking by utilizing tools like this public comment period. Awesome panel. Thank you so much. I have one other question from Ivy. Thank you for sending this in during the presentations, Ivy. Now, is it better to focus on a smaller, more specific ask for these public comments or something more general? Like, is it better to reiterate what others are saying or ask something new? And I will call upon Jenna to answer that since you answered last. Thanks, Jenna.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm totally happy to give it my best shot. I was typing in the chat there too. So just to clarify, you're asking if it's better to have a more specific comment or like a more high level one?
Correct.
Yeah, I think that my answer is yes to both. I think that the administration needs to be hearing more specific technical comments, especially if you are an expert in something, or if you live in a certain area where you're seeing specific climate impacts that need to be called out, all the way up to just a more general comment where you're like, this needs to be an inclusive plan. This needs to make sure that you're including highly and fully protected areas, maybe bridging the gap between the United States version of 30 by 30 that's outlined in this plan and the global outlook for 30 by 30 in the plan. So I don't know if that was exactly what you were looking for an answer, but I think that there's tremendous value in both high level comments and more technical specific comments.
And I'll add too to Jenna, we put together, our groups put together a set of sample asks. So if you feel that you're not entirely sure where to start, we have given you something to look at as a place to start if you're not sure what you want to say to NOAA, but you want to say something. And maybe something in your experience or where you live, as you read through some of those sample asks, resonates with you, whether it's about inaccessibility, whether it's about resilience to climate change. There's a whole set of asks that you can choose from that are going to be really helpful for NOAA to hear.
I'm just going to chime in and say, Ivy, that's a great question, and that's the right way to think about this. And Jenna was right about it's both. But like, for instance, I'll give you an example. We're an aquarium. We have 800,000 visitors annually. We have a huge audience. So it's about who are you speaking as, right? So speaking as an aquarium, I can't get super specific about something for my entire audience. It's not fair, and I'm not really accurately representing everyone. So I aim middle, right? It's not just like, yes, we support 30 by 30. Okay, that's too high level. What's in the middle? Coastal waters, right? As I showed you with that map, our coastal waters are mostly bare. That's a problem. So I'm trying to draw NOAA's attention to protecting our coastal waters. And I feel comfortable giving that opportunity to the audience to also echo this ask, right? But it's a mid-level ask, but it's a very important one still. So I feel that it's effective from a policy perspective, but it's also accessible from a public perspective. But like Jenna said, if you're a scientist and you know something really specific about MPAs or about a specific area or habitat, be sure to, show that in your comment.
I don't want anyone to feel intimidated or like potentially their lack of expertise in this area could be a barrier, because it's absolutely not. If all you have to say is, this is something that's important to me and here's why, that's valuable information for NOAA to hear as well.
Awesome. Thank you all for the answer. And it really sounds like yes to both, right? We can address the entirety of America the Beautiful while intertwining our personal stories with the motivation to get us to that next step. So thank you all. And thank you, Ivy, for the wonderful question. Well, everyone, it's been a fantastic hour. I would love the opportunity to send all of you into some smaller breakout rooms to personally discuss some of the comment building questions that you may have, how to assemble your thoughts and make them clear and concise. And yes, thank you, Jenna. We will follow up on unanswered questions. Feel free to either put those in the chat and I can record those, or also email those questions to us post-webinar. So as I was saying, we are going to break out into small groups of around 5 folks per breakout room. You'll be able to work directly alongside all of us. We're going to be discussing everything we just kind of discussed, but on a very personal level, and try and get those comments written, get those thoughts coordinated and ready to go. So everyone should be seeing a pop-up appear on your screen to join the breakout room, and we're going to run these for about 20 minutes or so. We'll probably Thank you all sincerely for joining us, our panel discussion, as well as our breakout rooms on America the Beautiful and how to submit an effective public comment. Just as follow-up and tidying things up, I want to ensure everyone knows that we will be sharing our contact information in a follow-up email. We will also be sharing the recording of this webinar. And to the best of our ability, we will get the Spanish closed captioning translated and ready to go for everyone who was not in attendance today. This follow-up is not the end of our communications, but really only the beginning as we move towards achieving 30% of land and water protections and conservation initiatives by 2030. Thank you all sincerely for joining us today. We will be in touch, and until then, calm tides, and may the wind be forever at your back. Thank you so much.